Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Belmont Saga, Part 2, Chapter 4, A Need for a Son. And as last week, this chapter, Chapter 4, is only a few pages long, so we will move on to Chapter 5, The Ruins of Caroline. Last week, we delved deep into the past and see the origins of Stenstrom's mother, Lady Jubilee of Tyrol, how she met her husband-to-be, Lord Stenstrom of Belmont, and how she stole his ass right off the ballroom floor in St. Gala's Vale from the younger sister of her social rival. St. Gala's Vale is a place, it's a landmark in League of Elder lore. It was a CWC built by the House of Xandar many centuries ago to stage attacks in the south. It was then destroyed after the Noab artifact Paramel took up residence in Ballwig Tower, and the sisters reclaimed it and knocked the structure down to the ground and took the Paramel back to their hidden places. Didn't stay flattened for long, as the House of Gala, who are big on Baz, and they're not only big on Baz, they're big, they're giants. Princess Gala of Baz is big in their lore. She's said to be a giant with 100 arms and 1,000 breasts. I tend to kind of just indulge myself when it comes to numbers. Oh, we're gonna have 100 arms and 1,000 breasts. Yes, they rebuilt it. And then eventually they moved on to Baz, and then it became known as St. Gala's Vale, and eventually it became the headquarters of the Ballwigs, and it's known as St. Gala's Vale because the light of the Paramel, as is usual with the Paramel, is said to still remain there even though it's gone. And in the light of the moon, various people's souls can be seen drifting about. People who have lost a love or are in search of a love, you see their souls drifting about the yard, and that's St. Gala's Vale. Anyways, I kind of went on a side tangent. Lady Jubilee steals Lady Vendra's man because she grew a quick liking to him too, and eventually they got married. And then Lady Vendra, not taking this sitting down, declared Weirgild against Lady Jubilee. She's like, I want frickin' revenge. I want to kill this lady. And she goes to the sisters and say, may I please, great sisterhood of light, kill this bitch? And they said, yes, you may. And according to law, then Lady Jubilee has to be informed that this Weirgild is on. And also, she wanted Weirgild against the entire house of Belmont-South Tyrol, and the sisters said, no, that is denied. You may not have that. If you do that, you will be in contempt of the law, and you might go to jail or worse. So that's where we ended off. Lady Jubilee starts hearing how dangerous space travel is, and her husband, Lord Stenstrom, I think I'm a little inconsistent on what he did before he became a captain, that he was either a comm officer or something else, maybe a navigator in his younger days. He might have done both. It's possible he could have fulfilled both missions at different times in his career before he became the captain of the fleet warbird Caroline. But her friends start telling her, oh, it's so dangerous flying around a spaceship. You could have spontaneous decompression. You could be captured by the Zaphans and taken into the Zaphan Armada. You can be just killed by micrometeors. You could lose your soul to gift valve. You can eat crappy food. You can be blown out of space in a battle with the Zaphans. There are all kinds of creepy things that can happen to you on a spaceship, but I'm sure any of those things are in play. But she took it to heart. And now we're going to see just what it means when Lady Jubilee loves somebody, because it can be pretty rough. So let's go ahead and proceed immediately. Chapter 4, A Need for a Son. And again, this is a pretty short-assed chapter. Let's begin immediately. And Lady Jubilee fell into a protracted state of mourning, always expecting her husband to fall, to die, in space. She took to wearing black on days when he had to leave with his ship. However, Captain Stenstrom was a good captain, a skilled captain. He endured and never fell despite many adventures in space. In a puerile attempt to blackmail Lord Stenstrom out of the stars, Lady Jubilee decided to use their children against him. "Oh, you wish an heir, my love? When you place your feet upon the ground for good, then you can expect a son, an heir to all we have. Until such time, you will have Belmont daughters." And it was said that the lady, falling back on her alleged sorcerer's knowledge, had learned various arcane methods of pre-selecting the sex of her children, as in the matter the Black Hats can do, and that she was determined to have girls, to keep them from following their father to the stars. More things for her to worry about. The fact that there were a great number of ladies in the fleet serving right next to her husband didn't occur to her. Jubilee expected ladies to behave just like she did, to have no profession, to sit in social circles, to bowl, to smoke, and, wherever possible, to create gossip. Many in and around Tyrol speculated on the method Jubilee used to prevent the creation of a son. Potions, poisons, complicated spells, enchanted items. The list went on and on. In any event, whatever she was doing worked, eventually racking up 29 daughters as Lord Stenstrom reappointed to his ship time and time again. Lord Stenstrom, though, was delighted with his daughters, and he loved them all as they grew into lovely ladies and went on their own way. But as the decades passed and he began to get older, the pressures of secession began to present themselves. They had all sorts of callers at the manor, including demure cousins and discreet, distant relatives, friends of friends, even the lords of the city of Tyrol, each wanting to discuss what was to be done with the holdings of Belmont-South Tyrol should there be no heir. Everybody, it seemed, was lining up to carve the estate into small, lucrative pieces, and nobody wanted to be forgotten or left out. There were already 29 daughters and no sons, and surely none of the latter could be expected at this point. With no heir, all they had would be lost. All their property and wealth would be redistributed to any game enough to step up and seize it, and their 29 daughters could expect nothing. Such was the time-honored but rather unfair custom of secession in the League. Lord Stenstrom, under pressure, began railing Lady Jubilee for a son. The house of Belmont-South Tyrol needed an heir, otherwise their branch would fall. If only for their daughters' sakes, they needed a son to protect their assets. But Lady Jubilee, the most stubborn woman in Tyrol, would not budge. No sons, no lost coffins to cry over. The day he left the fleet, that's when House Belmont-South Tyrol would have its heir, and not before. But apparently Lord Stenstrom had learned a thing or two himself in his travels. It was said he received a mysterious letter on gray paper one day, in his fleet bag, with no return stamp. It was said the letter detailed how Lady Jubilee had been taking some sort of homemade potion to prevent the creation of a male child through the years, and that she had no intention of discontinuing its use until he retired from the fleet. If he ever wanted a son and secured the succession of his household, he would have to fight fire with fire. "Go to Baz," the letter said. "Seek the elixir of the gods, and you shall have your son." And Lord Stenstrom did just that. On Baz, he discovered a local pharmacy selling a mystical substance that would, in essence, supercharge his Belmont seed, adding wings to his male YY sperm and lead weights to the female XX. Additionally, these god sperm would be packed with nothing but Stenstrom's best, his courage, his brains, his tenacity, and so on. Paying a healthy price in Baz credits, Stenstrom took the vial and left the pharmacy. He returned to his ship and downed the potion, feeling quite invigorated in the afterwards. He would later hear that the pharmacy burned to the ground shortly after he made his purchase. But thusly armed with a loin full of God's sperm, the next time he took his loving silver-haired lady to bed, something remarkable happened. A battle was waged within her womb. Lady Jubilee's herbal-enhanced male-killing eggs against Lord Stenstrom's God sperm. And apparently the God sperm carried the field, as 2 years later, after a very difficult pregnancy, Stenstrom the Younger was born. Stenstrom the Younger was a delightful boy. Everybody thought so, including his army of older sisters, most old enough to themselves to be his mother, and the younger ones as well. Dark-haired in the Belmont fashion, bright and smiling, he lit up Lady Jubilee, she sitting and watching him play with his 2 next youngest sisters, Virginia and Lyra, for hours on end in the nursery and about the grounds. Circumstances, though, appeared to be conspiring against Lady Jubilee and her new son. The Weirgild of old was still in effect, and with the birth of her son, Lady Jubilee saw sinister conspiracies and hidden threats floating about the manor more than ever. She was convinced Lady Vendra in faraway Remnath was at it again in earnest, and even though the Weirgild was legally only for Lady Jubilee, as with the amazing decades before, it appeared she was going to come at her infant son, as that is what would hurt Lady Jubilee and the House of Belmont-South Tyrol the most. Apparently, Lady Vendra was quite patient. She'd waited over 80 years. One evening, Lady Jubilee found a poisonous wasp in Stenstrom's nursery, placed there in a glass vial through the window. She had a terrible nightmare of a spring-loaded, iron-jawed trap lurking beneath the sands of her son's play area. She awoke from bed and ran to the play area, finding nothing, but was certain she'd seen the outline of it in the sand, and that it had been there and been removed. Then, one afternoon, it happened. Her son was abducted. Lady Jubilee had taken her daughters Virginia and Lyra along with the toddler Stenstrom to the city to see a children's play in the park. Virginia wanted some candy from an inviting stand. Lady Jubilee turned away for a brief moment to get it for her, and when she turned back again, Stenstrom was gone, the remains of a waft cloud quickly dissipating in front of his stroller. A crowd gathered as Jubilee screamed for help. A hastily organized search of the nearby city streets found nothing. Lady Jubilee took her daughters and went straight home to get her coach. She was going west to Remnath to face Lady Vendra of Cone and kill her. Perhaps she hadn't given her enough credit for holding a deadly grudge. Perhaps she should have done this years ago. And if her son had been harmed in the least, if one hair was out of place, she would kill every last one of them, including hangers-on, servants, passing associates, and family pets. When she got to the manor, she was surprised to find a contingent of sisters waiting for her. Her son was happily playing at their feet. The sisters told her that they had, in fact, listened to her pleas regarding Lady Vendra's improper conduct and had been diligently monitoring the situation. By attempting to abduct her son, Lady Vendra had violated the terms of her Weirgild, and therefore it was immediately revoked, and Lady Vendra had been taken into custody and was to be punished in an undisclosed location. The sisters, through their marines, told her that they were glad they could help, and that her son was a joyous, beautiful boy, and a testament to the virility of House Belmont-South Tyrol. Jubilee was elated for the praise and took her son into her arms. She never had much good to say about the sisters, and they'd nearly been her death during her pregnancy, but they had come to her son's aid. "Whatever we have is yours, great sister, for my son's life." "Thank you, great lady," they replied. "We shall remember that." And with that, we conclude part 4, or chapter 4, a need for a son. So we see Lady Jubilee's plan to get her husband out of the fleet and on the ground was just to deny him an heir, to give him daughters. Now, in various books, it's been demonstrated that elder women, Sigillus of Metatron, and even a giftless Johnny like Lieutenant Kylos, can pre-select the sex of their child. They don't really. Sig never needed any herbs or things like that to aid in that selection. She just said, while the act was happening, she would just go girl, 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 girl. She would just think girl, and then she would have a girl. Or boy, 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 and she would have a boy. And Lieutenant Kylos was kind of the same way. I mean, she, even though she didn't pre-select the sex of her eventual son, Lord Sebastian, that she could turn her womb on and off at will. So she couldn't get pregnant unless she wanted to get pregnant. And in this case, though, Lady Jubilee's taking an herbal remedy to prevent the coming of a boy child. And it has to do with tribal lineage and affiliation. So Lady Jubilee is a Tyrol. And Sig, it's unknown what house she comes from, but it's probably a Vith household. And the Vith can do things that other tribes can't. And being a Vith and a black hat to boot, with even more arcane abilities, Sig can easily choose the sex of her child, while Lady Jubilee, who doesn't have those skills and those innate abilities, can't. She has to take something to pre-select the sex of her child. If you haven't noticed, this part of the book is kind of like Great Expectations by Dickens. I always loved that book. Love that book, especially the Miss Havisham character, and I always found that this is kind of similar to that, and it'll become more apparent as the story unfolds that the Miss Havisham, the jilted lover, jilted at her wedding day, always wearing her wedding dress, the banquet tables filled with delicious food that would have been consumed on her wedding day, sitting there, rotten food for rats and so forth. And this is kind of like that. I just love that story, and I incorporated some of those thoughts into this part of the book. It's not apparent yet, but it will be shortly thereafter. Lord Stenstrom is just a child at this point in the story, and Jubilee is convinced that the Lady Vendra is out to kill him. She finds like a deadly wasp in his nursery. She finds some sort of steel trap in the sand area of their where they would play behind the manor, and that should ring a bell from earlier in the book. It really should, but we'll move on. And then eventually somebody abducted the toddler Lord Stenstrom, and Jubilee was convinced it was Lady Vendra, and she was going to head out to Remnath, confront her, and kill her. Lady Jubilee is pretty tough. She could probably make it happen, but who knows? In any event, she gets back to the manor, and the sisters are there. And he's playing at their feet, and they said, we've been, monitoring this situation because we were concerned about the health and safety of all those in your household, and we arrested Lady Vendra, and we're going to take her into custody as she is in breach of the law, and here's your son. And again, I want to reiterate from last week, if you're thinking this is some sort of chosen one story, think again. God damn it, I hate those. Hate them. Hate them. This is not a chosen one story. Get that out of your head right now. Or as they say in Spanish, ahora mismo. So let's continue on here. Oh, but I guess I have to mention before we proceed that, okay, so Lady Jubilee was taking some sort of potion to prevent the birth of a boy child, but then eventually, with the pressures of secession on him, where the wolves are starting to nip at their heels. And if you, again, the league is run by the sisters, but most of the laws of heraldry and secession are male dominated. So if you have a house and you have no male heirs, your house is considered extinct. The House of Durst from the previous books, good friends of the House of Blanchford, had 7 daughters and no sons. And after the death of several people, their house was considered extinct. And Captain Davidge, knowing that people were going to start coming to claim their items, their possessions, went in with his people, and they took everything and put them in a secure hidden location so that when the wolves came to pick the place clean, they found nothing in the Castle Durst. And Captain Davidge will keep these things in a hidden, secure space under lock and key until one day perhaps someone with a familial claim to the patent of the House of Durst will come and reconstitute the household, and then Captain Davidge will give him back all of their possessions. So he hears about this crazy-ass potion on Baz. And then, if you ever want a crazy-ass potion, the place to get it is Baz. Baz is kind of like the Wild West, not only in terms of just it's a wild place to be, but in terms of sciences, in terms of medical arts, and in terms of the arcane, Baz is where it's at. And if you want something good and arcane, you go to Baz. And he hears that there's this potion known as the God Sperm Potion. You drink this shit, and you're gonna impregnate your lady or your favorite person, whoever that might be, and you impregnate them. The God Sperm Potion will ensure the birth of a very exceptional male child. So he goes to Baz. He gets a letter, and they tell him about this potion, this tincture, and he goes to some pharmacy in Baz and buys it, and then returns home to Belmont and drinks it, and then he and Jubilee just slam head on in the sack. They smash hard, and apparently some sort of conditions happen in her womb as the two juices mingle, and Stenstrom the younger is born 2 years later. So apparently the God Sperm Potion carried the day, but we'll see what all that means. And again, this is not a chosen story, so okay, it's not. You'll see later on. In any event, let's proceed immediately. Part 5, or Chapter 5, The Ruins of Caroline. And you notice a lot of the things that Aram and Tara were banding about. You remember them, Aram and Tara? You remember them? Hey, it's Aram. They talk about the ruins of Caroline, and here it is here. So all that stuff wasn't there just for shits and giggles. It actually bears itself out in the story. So let's get into it here. Chapter 5, The Ruins of Caroline. Belmont Manor was divided into several wings. Stenstrom and several of his sisters lived in the eastern wing, and his parents, along with any of his remaining older sisters, lived in the northern. As he steadily grew and became more aware of his surroundings, one thing was made perfectly clear. The manor home and the grounds surrounding it comprised his entire universe, and that universe was sternly ruled by an implacable, all-knowing, all-seeing goddess, his mother. Sitting at the grand table for meals, Stenstrom usually sat towards the back end where he could see outside through the Marian arches to the hillside beyond. His two favorite sisters, Lyra and Virginia, usually sat with him. The rest of his sisters appeared like adults to him, like their mother, regal, elegantly dressed in their Belmont-South Tyrol gowns, their various heads of styled hair, a mixture of pewterlock, half pewterlock, which is black and silver, and black. One of his sisters, Ione, had blonde hair, a burnished color of a golden candlestick, and nobody was quite sure how that happened. Ione was a blonde oddity at Mother's black and silver table. As Stenstrom grew old enough to understand the goings-on around him, he soon discovered that though he had a great many sisters and only one mother, She was equally disruptive in all of their lives. Mother, by herself, surrounded every one of them in a smothering embrace, and the situation, though apparently harmonious on the surface, was anything but. The game was played many times over the years, with any number of his sisters sitting at one side of the board and his mother, the Grandmaster, sitting alone at the other. He recalled his sister Celesta sitting there properly with knife and fork in hand, her hair a gloriously shiny shade of pewterlock. "Mother, I hate you," she said quietly. "Oh, is that a fact, Celesta? And no, you shall not marry that fool from Tuck. Who ever heard of such a thing?" Celesta sat there stiff as a board, posture perfect, hair perfect, with only her trembling utensils held in white-knuckled fingers, betraying the rage she was feeling within. His sister Nylar, some time later, "Mother, I wish to go to the schools in Vithland." "And why do you wish to go to the schools in Vithland?" "I wish to learn mathematics. I believe I would excel in such a course of study." "I will not have a mathematician for a daughter." But I have already filled out the required forms and passed the necessary entry exams. Please, Mother." "No, Nylar, and that is all, lest you wish to face the knife." Knife and fork trembled in her hands as well. And on it went, each sister being foiled in one manner or another by their omnipresent mother. Of course, there were the short-lived rebellions, the minor schisms, the empty chairs at the table from time to time. Stenstrom's sister, the radiant Calamy, being the most persistent at trying to escape, at running away. Her chair was frequently empty at the table, but always there was the flash of smoke and the clap of thunder, and there was Calamy, dazed, bewildered, with a traveling hat tied to her head, often holding small suitcases and other baggages. Always there was the whirling about and the shrieking and frustrated rage, usually right in front of everybody at the table. "Right on time," Mother said. "Come, remove your hat and eat your dinner, young lady. We shall discuss this in more depth later." Stenstrom came to learn there was no escaping Mother. Run wherever you wanted, hide wherever you liked. Mother would find you and have you home in a literal flash of smoke. He had no idea how Mother accomplished the things that she did. But she did. The proof was at the dinner table, an empty chair at the beginning of the meal, and an enraged, trembling sister occupying it by the end. Mother was everywhere in the manor, almost as if she were the manor, a living, silver-haired embodiment of the house. She could move silently, and she could vanish from sight and pop up out of nowhere at any given time. The shadows in the manor and on the grounds were full of Mother. She could emerge out of any one of them whenever she wished. Stenstrom and Lyra often played in the old Marian ruins, dotting the grounds, looking through the old telescopes and old astronomical instruments left there. "What are these things for?" Stenstrom would ask, putting his eye to the viewfinder. And Mother's voice would answer, "They are for seeing the star that only the Marians can see. A star does not exist." And there she was, like a ghost. Yet, however stern and unbending Mother was, she was also loving and nurturing, having equal time for all her 30 children. There was enough time in the day to tend to her children, and Mother would stop time and make the day longer if need be. Such was her power, he thought. He recalled seeing his sister Calamy, yes, the same Calamy who often tried to run away, Calamy the rebel, Calamy who said she hated Mother, weeping into her chest, sobbing over a man who had jilted her. "There, there," Mother said, holding her heartbroken daughter. "There, there." "Tighter, by creation, make it tighter," Stenstrom heard coming from his sister's room as he walked down the corridor. He was on the prowl for Lyra, that little tart. She had gotten him into a painful wrestling hold and made him say uncle earlier in the day, and he was going to get her back. The door to his sister Constance's room was ajar, and a yellow beam of light came spilling out. He peeked in. Inside was Constance's large bedroom with an open terrace and a view of the sea. Constance was sitting at her parlor, apparently getting ready for a night out. His other sisters, Jania and Ione, the weird blonde-headed one, were there, attending to her. Jania was working on Constance's hair, and Ione was pulling on the strings of a tight corset, squeezing Constance into a painful, sunk-in hourglass shape. A hollow terminal image spun on the boudoir. An image of an oddly dressed, green-haired woman was illuminated there. Ah! There were Lyra and Virginia, sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching. He crept up and got Lyra from behind, pulling her backwards. She managed to turn around, and they were arm in arm, grunting and rolling about on the floor. Though Lyra was several years older, Stenstrom had matured to the point where she couldn't muscle him around anymore. He pinned her down, though she struggled fiercely. Constance turned to them. "Will you two cut it out?" she hissed. "If you want to fight, go outside in the hallway and fight. This is important." Stenstrom had a powerful respect and a bit of awe for his sister Constance. She was 7 sisters down the line, and to him appeared as a fully grown woman. She was tall and broad shoulders and carried herself in a distinctive manner. He let Lyra go, and they seated themselves next to Virginia, who was eating a bowl of fruit. She offered a piece or two to Stenstrom, and he took them. "What are you doing?" he asked as Ione continued pulling on Constance's corset. "I'm leaving," she said. "I'm going Carofab." "What? Why?" She sighed, both from Stenstrom's question and from the tightening of the corset. "Because I need to go. I need to be my own person. I've had enough. Enough!" Stenstrom gazed at Constance. She looked odd. Jania had made her face up in thick white makeup, especially around the eyes, which were heavily highlighted in black. Her cheeks were also deeply rouged. Her pewter-lock hair was pulled into a strange style and painted in a distinctive shade of fern green. She appeared to be making herself up in the image of the green-haired girl floating about on the hollow terminal. Ione, her foot placed on the small of Constance's back, tied off the corset. Gasping slightly, Constance stepped into a black silk garter inlaid with sequins. She pulled it up to mid-thigh and arranged it. "What's that thing?" Stenstrom asked. "It's my attempt to duplicate a Very Mary." "A Very Mary? Well, you're full of questions tonight, aren't you, little brother?" she said. Ione then fetched Constance's gown. As she put it on, Stenstrom could see the frilly, somewhat garish gown wasn't what his sisters usually wore. It was outrageous and strange in a trashy postmodern style Mother would never approve of. Again, just like the hollow terminal image. "Before you ask, this is a Caroline gown, Belle," she said, touching up the black makeup around her eyes. "I've spent months putting it together." "What's a Caroline?" "An old house that went zaffin' long ago. Their ruins still stand to the west in the Halalands, and as the story goes, every so often a Caroline maiden will simply pop up out of the blue amid their ruins. That's the Very Mary. That's how it works. You see, if a Caroline maiden gets into trouble somewhere, the Very Mary zaps them back safe and sound to their ancestral grounds. Gentlemen seeking a bride often go there bearing gifts, hoping to encounter one. I'm going out there tonight and I'm going to win a love. I am going to go Carofab. I'm going to pass myself off as a Caroline maiden. According to the 2610 spy network, I understand Lord Trevor of Howell shall be out there tonight, and I am going to meet him amid the ruins, disguised as a Caroline." "Well, what if a real Caroline lady shows up? I heard that actually does happen sometimes," Ione said, tying up Constance's gown. "Well, then Lord Trevor will get a lovely show. I'll scratch her eyes out right in front of him if I have to." Constance stood, looking odd and rather austere in her Caroline gown, weird hair and heavy makeup. "All right, I think I'm ready." She shook her hand and produced out of thin air a small round mirror. She looked herself over. Yes, I'm ready. Oh, this is so exciting." Stenstrom was confused. "So, you said you want to be your own person?" "Yes." "So, you're going to do that by pretending to be someone else?" Constance stopped and thought a moment. "I am going to be my own person by pretending to be somebody who doesn't have our mother. How about that?" That made sense to him. "Oh," he said. Constance went to Ione and hugged her. She moved on to Johnny and hugged her too. "Mother will not allow this," Stenstrom said. "She'll have you back here in no time." Constance turned to Stenstrom. "Will she?" She pointed to the door. "Look there." Stenstrom turned to the door, and when he looked back, Constance was gone, vanished. "Constance?" he asked. "I can do what Mother can do, Belle," came her voice from behind him. "And I know all her tricks. I know how to avoid the maidens." He looked behind, and there was nothing there. He felt a hand touch his shoulder, and there she was, all strange looking again. She smiled and knelt down as best she could and gave Stenstrom, Lyra, and Virginia a common hug. "Oh, you three sprouts, how I love you. Be good to each other, and don't let Mother put an end to all your dreams. Promise me that." "Well, when will we see you again, Constance?" Virginia asked. "Well, I don't know. If all goes well, possibly never." With that, Constance vanished again. Her voice called back on the wind. "Farewell." Constance's sad parting was a bit overly dramatic, as Stenstrom soon learned. He would see his big sister Constance again and again, many times. She sitting at the table on holidays, and at other times with her new husband, Lord Trevor of Howell. Though he had heard Mother had been enraged at Constance's antics, passing herself off as a wayward Zaffin maiden, she apparently found favor with Constance's bold inventiveness, and Lord Trevor was welcomed to the family warmly. In later years, Stenstrom would wonder if Lord Trevor ever realized that his Lady Constance, the woman who appeared before him in the ruins of Caroline Manor, was not, in fact, a Caroline. He had to, as he didn't seem to be a complete idiot. He wondered if it really mattered. He'd gone out there to find love, and his mission had been accomplished. And with that, we conclude Chapter 5, The Ruins of Caroline. The House of Caroline is just a fun story in the League of Elder. And we see, if you recall, other books in the Shadow Tech Goddess series, Lady Melazar of Caroline. She is a Caroline maiden, and she in fact did end up in the Caroline ruins. As they mentioned, they wear a garter belt, which is called the Very Merry. It's the ancestral Los Capricos weapon of the House of Caroline. So in this case, it's meant for females. You know, again, some Los Capricos weapons are gender specific, and the Very Merry is one of them. Well, they're wearing this garter belt. They're really invulnerable to harm if they run into some sort of trouble and their life is in peril. The Very Merry will mystically zap them back to their ancestral manor grounds, which happens to be in the Halalands of Cana, and their house is a ruin. They left centuries ago, so it's mostly rubble at this point. And they'll just pop up there, confused and somewhat bewildered. Melazar of Caroline says she's been there dozens and dozens of times, that she lives kind of a dangerous life. And it does happen. And there's a fad where gentlemen will go out there, and sometimes ladies will go out there and wait for a Caroline maiden just to appear out of nowhere. It's kind of the fad is a profitable one for the locals. They cleared the grounds, made it safe for walking. They leveled the ground, even paved it in some spots, and they keep the grasses in trim and so forth. And it's customary for these men to go out there and they'll leave a gift like flowers or candy or even little notes, and as they wait for their love to show up. And there's as Constance mentioned, there's a whole spy network that exists just to keep track of who's going to be out at these ruins and when. And prospective ladies or prospective people can see who's going to be there at whatever times and go out there to meet them and go Carofab, as it's known, to fake being a Caroline maiden, as his sister Constance was doing. She was wearing a weird gown. And one thing about Caroline gowns, they have it's called a caratina. It's basically barbed wire. That's what their bodice is. It's like a barbed wire gown. They're very very gothic, very punkish. Hair is usually some crazy color, in this case green, and they paint their faces like a harlequin with black eyes. That's just what they do. And Melazar of Caroline, when she showed up, she was dressed in this attire, lots of makeup, a crazy gown, a barbed wire bodice, and she also wore these Zaffin trinkets in her mouth called flash-ons, which makes her face light up. It's just a Zaffin fad, and Caroline's are Zaffins, so her face would just light up like a unsteady flashlight, and it's kind of a cool effect. It really should be a real fad, not just something I made up. That's just my opinion. So Stenstrom's sister Constance goes out there and meets this guy she was hopeful for, and I guess everything went well because they eventually got married, and she would show up at the house a lot. Mother was pissed, very pissed at this doings, but eventually she saw the worth in her ingenuity and let bygones be bygones. So that is just a brief aside, and if you remember to beginning of this part, Aram said his brother had married a Caroline maiden, and Stenstrom basically assumes that she was a Carofab, a fraud. There's more Carofabs than there are Caroline maidens, although they do show up from time to time. In any event, we are now at chapter 6, and that will be next week, The Blood Promise. And we're going to find out exactly why Paymaster Stenstrom never joined the fleet. And the Blood Promise will spell all that out. So, until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.